Brett Lindstrom, you'll be first on this, then Glenn Freeman, Jack Heidel, and Lee Terry. Numerous studies have shown that American schools do not measure up to many other industrialized countries in educating children, especially in math and science. What could the federal government do to improve public education in the United States, Brett Lindstrom?
Well, in my original comments, I said that getting it out of the federal government would be one of the first steps. And you're right. Out of the OECD countries, or the 30 developed countries, we measure 21st and 25th in math and science. So definitely, we're not going down the right path. And it goes back to having it at the federal level. Those dollars do not get back to the individual and the students. And we need to have more local people get involved, and teachers and students who can make better decisions for the children of this country.
Glenn Freeman.
Department of Education was started because of political promise by Carter. The federal government can do nothing to improve education. They haven't done it. They can do nothing to do it. Education goes to the states, goes to the local communities, but first of all, the parents have to get more involved. There's no point in the parents getting involved if Big Brother in Washington is telling them what to do. So the federal government can do nothing for education. They should get out of it. They have nothing to do with it, and they certainly can't improve it.
Jack Heidel?
I have an education program which is related to and fits in with my interest in eliminating the deficit. The Department of Education has a budget of about $70 billion a year. Within the for just elementary and secondary education alone, there are 100 different programs within the Department of Education. That means that districts and states have to apply separately for up to 100 different programs to get the money from the federal government. What I think we should do is take all these programs, combine them into one giant pot of money, consolidate them all into one program, and give the money back to the states as block grants, and cut the amount of money by 20%. In other words, we'd make big budget savings, and we would give the states the flexibility and freedom to develop their own programs to improve education, and we'd have experiments going on in 50 different states, and we'd find out what works best and what works less than best, and we would make progress in education.
Lee Terry?
The reality is that even with OPS, who has the most Title I students in the entire state in one school district, only about 8%, maybe 8.5% are federal funds. But it's almost 100% of the rules and regulations that Phil, the TAC building, trying to comply with. So obviously it will help education to cut those strings. The federal government shouldn't be regulating the Millard school districts or the Omaha public school districts. Let the money flow to the Title I schools that are in the Title I programs, but quit trying to run our schools. Cut the ties. Parents have to be involved. And when you look at the best school districts, they're the school districts that encourage parental involvement. Even in Omaha public schools, when you look at the best individual schools are the ones where they invite the parents into the schools. We see too many of our schools locally that keep parents out. They don't want parents to know. That's when they're unaccountable and our education degrades.
I think everybody is kind of of the same mind on this question, but we do have built-in 30-second responses, so we're going to go forward with that. Brett Lindstrom, you're first.
Well, like you said, I think we agree on that one. So I don't know if I was glad to see that Glenn and I can agree on something here. So,
Glenn Freeman.
I'm a teacher. I teach 3 homeschool classes. I have 2 here in Omaha and 1 in Lincoln. Some of my students have gone on to military academy. As a matter of fact, I have one lady now that's in Hillsdale College. Next Sunday, I'm going to the graduation of one of my students. There's a complete difference in homeschool children and they are in public school system. And it's because of the government bureaucracy.
Jack Heidel?
I'm a member of the Learning Community Coordinating Council in Douglas and Sarpy County. I campaigned for that office in both 2008 and 2010. And one thing I heard more about probably than anything else was how unpopular No Child Left Behind is, especially amongst teachers, but amongst lots of other people too. And my proposal to consolidate all of these 100 federal programs into one giant program, give the money back to the states, would be a replacement for No Child Left Behind, which is now hasn't yet been renewed.
Lee Terry.
Yeah, well, No Child Left Behind, I think, is a good symbol of the overreach of the federal government. That bill was actually intended to make schools accountable, but yet give the power to the local school districts and the state board to decide the tests. But yet the Department of Education decided they were not going to allow any local or state control and started dictating what tests Nebraska was supposed to do. So No Child Left Behind has become a symbol to me of bureaucracy gone bad and needs to be eliminated.
This next question has to do with super PACs. The order is Glenn Freeman, Jack Heidel, Lee Terry, and Brett Lindstrom. A 5-4 Supreme Court ruling enables corporations, unions, and individuals to contribute unlimited amounts of money to so-called super PACs that then support candidates. A Washington Post ABC poll found that 69% of the public believe super PACs should be illegal. There is room for legislation that would require donors to promptly reveal the source of contributions, so at least the public can see the connections between super PACs and candidates before the election. Would you support such legislation, Glenn Freeman?
Yeah, the Supreme Court was wrong when they ruled that equated money with freedom of speech. They were wrong then, they're wrong now. Because we, the public, if we accept that fact, then the average billionaire has more speech than I do. So we have to go back from the very beginning. You cannot equate contributions, the money you give a campaign, to freedom of speech. That's where the problem lies, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as I talk to you here, I'm going to give you the reason why we have the problem and give you the answer. I'm not going to give you the political Washington speech here. So you won't get that from me. The problem is when the Supreme Court ruled that money equates to freedom of speech, that's where the problem lies.
Jack Heidel?
We can't keep money out of politics. And the question is, how do we make sure that it's transparent and visible what's going on? And so I support such a legislation to promptly reveal all funding for super PACs. Now, I think we also should expand the amount of money that people can give directly to political campaigns, because it's because of that limitation that super PACs got started in the first place. So basically, let's make sure that everything is completely transparent in a prompt way as possible.
Lee Terry?
Yeah, this is a new territory we're entering with super PACs, and boy, I got to admit to you, it makes me really uneasy. But free speech is the underlying premise here. It is the First Amendment to our Constitution, and there is nothing more protected in the Constitution than the right to express your political opinions. That's the most scrutinized, the most important. And if you can stand up and support a cause and support an individual for running, that's political speech and the most protected. So the Supreme Court was right in determining that your right to speak politically should be protected. And in that, there has to be reasonable controls and restrictions on dollars. I support opening it up, but having full disclosure. Full disclosure, immediate disclosure. That sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Brett Lindstrom.
Well, I believe in upholding the Supreme Court's law to have the super PACs. Touching on Jack's point, we are limited individually on how much we can give. I think we do need to open that up quite a bit. And going based on transparency, we need to see who has their hand in the pot of these politicians and who is controlling these people. Because they talk about, even when we talk about the Republican side, talk about the Cook brothers, you talk about on the Democratic side, you have a litany of people. But we need to have transparency in those super PACs so we can see why the decisions are being made the way they are.
30-second responses. Glenn Freeman?
The idea that the Supreme Court can equate money with freedom of speech is ludicrous. Super PACs are what you call factions. And factions are spoke of if these people are only interested in their very local interests. So this country was formed by the people. We the people. Not we the PACs, not we any particular faction. It's you. So when you let these factions gather together, they override what you as an individual want.
Jack Heidel.
I'm afraid I have to disagree with Mr. Freeman on this. Freedom of speech and spending money are really closely related, so transparency and visibility are the keys in keeping the political process and money in the political process as clean as possible.
Lee Terry?
I personally like the idea that people that are pro-life or pro-whatever can send their $25 in to the organization and know that it's going to make a difference in getting the message out through advertising or advocacy. I think that empowers people when they can band together. I surely don't want to restrict their abilities to do that.
Brett Liston?
Well, I agree. It empowers the individual that might not have as much money. If you don't allow that, what's going to happen is you're going to have just rich people running for office, and they're going to be dictating the law of the land, which isn't good for the individual and the free speech of the individual citizen.
Next question. The order is Jack Heidel, Lee Terry, Brett Lindstrom, and Glenn Freeman. If you believe our tax code needs refining, explain what measures you would promote to make that happen, Jack Heidel.
Well, I'm in favor of broad-based tax reform, of a very extensive reform. I think that all types of income should be taxed at the same level. Wages, investment income, i.e. dividends and capital gains, and business income. Let's tax them all at the same uniform rate. Remove, ideally, all deductions to bring that rate down absolutely as low as we can, to the lowest possible uniform rate that would apply to everything. This would be a huge stimulus to the economy. And let's also make it a flat tax. In other words, this would mean that we're going to be raising, right now, investment and dividend and capital gain income capital gains are taxed at 15%. They would go up to somewhere in the low 20s if we have this uniform rate in the middle. They'll go up. But if we have a flat tax, then we'll keep those rates as low as possible. And it will be transparent and fair, and the best thing we can do to stimulate the economy.
Lee Terry.
Yeah, I really believe, and I've touted the flat tax. Well, I first got on that with Ronald Reagan back in 1980, the first president I could vote for, and supported him in Nebraska. I thought he was right then, and I think he's right now. That's why in the Ryan budget that Mr. Lindstrom would have voted against, standing with Nancy Pelosi on that. The provision in there was to go to a flat tax at 10% and a 25%, both corporate and individual, and removing most of the deductions. Now, all of the deductions hadn't been, but I would have supported keeping the mortgage interest in the individuals. But even here in Nebraska, we have companies here, major employers, that are paying a full 35% corporate tax because they don't get the special breaks that have been passed by Congress over the last 40, 50 years. But yet a company like GE pays zero. And so I think we have to go to a system that's absolutely fairer and treats everyone equal.
Brett Lindstrom.
Well, certainly we need to reform the corporate or individual tax rate in this country. Currently, 46% of people do not pay taxes. And when that happens, it jeopardizes things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And just touching on unemployment, we have close to 20% unemployment when you talk about people who are underworked, who have given up work, and people, just people who continue to look. We're 8.2% in that regard. So we need to reform the corporate tax code so that we are competitive globally and we get people back to work so we can then facilitate the likes of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And going back to getting the individual, everybody needs to have skin in the game.
Glenn Freeman.
Amendment 16 to the Constitution is unconstitutional. Clearly, it should be done away with. What I recommend is a sales tax, a national sales tax. If you buy it, you pay it. If you don't buy it, you don't pay it. What Mr. Terry didn't tell you is that 10% is on the first $100,000. After you get over $100,000, it goes to 25%. So before you take your kids to the movie, the government is going to take 1/4 of your salary, just flat off the top. Right flat off the top. The only tax that you should have that is constitutional is a national sales tax. You buy it, you pay it. If you don't buy it, you don't pay it.